My jaw hurts. It's been hurting since January of 1944, and it'll hurt until I die, and every doctor I've ever sat in front of has found nothing wrong with it. 3 dentists, 2 specialists, a man at the hospital in Exeter who stuck needles into my gum line looking for nerve damage and came up empty. It isn't pain exactly. It's more like, you know when you've been clenching your teeth too hard for too long and you get that deep bone ache? That's it. Constant. Low and steady, and there whether I'm sleeping or awake, though it gets worse in cold weather. And worse again when I read certain things in the paper, and worse again right now, talking about this, which I suppose tells you something about where the vibration is coming from. My name is James Holt. Jim, leading seaman, His Majesty's Royal Navy, signals, and radio. 22 years old in November 1943, which is when they put me on a ship called HMS William Scoresby in Stanley Harbor in the Falkland Islands, and told me I was going south. I grew up in Salford. South to me was Stockport. I'm going to tell you what happened down there. All of it, this time. All of it, this time. I've never told anyone the whole of it. Not a single person in 80 years. And I'm 83 now, and Margaret's been gone since 2009, and my son's in Canada, and doesn't read the papers, and I still wake up at 3 in the morning feeling that vibration in my back teeth. Still hear what came through the radio in my dreams, and I think, right, enough. Someone needs to know this. There's something else. I have a piece of paper, 1 torn page from a supply manifest, official Royal Navy Form S, 1043, inventory of oceanographic equipment loaded aboard HMS William Scoresby, November 1943. I keep it in a tobacco tin on the mantelpiece. Boring form, boring numbers. What matters is the bottom right corner. Pencil, 7 words, cramped handwriting I'd know anywhere. I'll tell you what the words say. But first I have to tell you whose handwriting it is. And for that, I have to tell you everything else. So, we begin. They called it Operation Tabarin. You can find the edges of it, if you look, declassified in the 1980s. Some of it. A wartime survey mission to the South Shetland Islands. Scientific observation. Navigation data. Navigation data. Officially, we were there to stop Germany or Argentina from using Antarctic waters as a base of operations. 14 men, 2 ships, 1 winter at the bottom of the world. That's the story they told. What they sealed, what is still sealed, some of it, and what I believe will never be unsealed, is what we found on Deception Island. What found us? Deception Island is part of the South Shetlands, about 100 miles north of the Antarctic Peninsula. From the outside, it looks like a horseshoe, a ring of black volcanic rock, snow on top, rising 500 feet out of the Southern Ocean. Grim. Desolate. Like God had started building a wall and then just stopped. But there's a gap in the horseshoe, a narrow channel in the southern face, barely wide enough for a ship if you're careful. They call it Neptune's Bellows. And if you sail through it, and the current and the rocks on either side do not want to let you in, you discover that the island is hollow. Hollow. It's a caldera, a flooded volcanic crater. You sail through that gap, and suddenly you're inside an enclosed harbor 3 miles across, ringed completely by the black cliffs, cut off from the Southern Ocean gale. You sail through that gap, and suddenly you're inside an enclosed harbor 3 miles across, ringed completely by the black cliffs, cut off from the Southern Ocean gale. There's a beach of dark volcanic ash. The water inside is warm in places, geothermal vents heating it from below. In the middle of an Antarctic winter, patches of the caldera stay open, and steam pale mist rising off the surface in the cold air. I thought it was remarkable when I first saw it. The 4th of December, 1943. Beautiful, in a bleak way. Like the planet had made a private room. That's not what it was. But I didn't know that yet. 14 of us on Tabarin, split across 2 ships, Scoresby and Fitzroy. Our commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander Reginald Marsh, Royal Navy, 38 years old. If I tried to put him in front of you, I'd say, Take every naval officer you've ever imagined and remove any trace of doubt. 6 feet 1 inch of absolute certainty. Neat mustache. Voice like a planed board. Flat, smooth, with no give to it at all. He'd served convoy escort in the North Atlantic, and he'd been through things there that I think had calcified something in him. Whatever soft parts he might once have had were gone by the time I met him. I respected him. I want to be clear about that. He was fair and he was competent, and he was exactly the right man for a difficult but comprehensible situation. He was the wrong man entirely for what Deception Island turned out to be. Dr. Arthur Kemp was our civilian element, a geologist, Natural Environment Research Council. 45 years old, short, round-faced with a ginger beard he never quite managed to tame. He wore the same brown canvas jacket every day, regardless of temperature, and he was always carrying something. Rock samples, specimen jars, his magnifying loupe on a cord round his neck, notebooks full of writing so small you needed the loupe just to read his own notes. He talked constantly, to himself as much as anyone, a running commentary on everything he observed, the way some people's minds are too full to stay quiet. He was the kind of person who made you feel the world was more interesting than you'd assumed if you bothered to listen. He was right about everything, every single thing. Nobody listened. Frank Doyle, 23, from Cork, freckled, red-haired, built like a question mark, all height and no width. Freckled, red-haired, built like a question mark, all height and no width. He operated the sonar equipment, and he was gifted at it the way some people are gifted at music, something native and intuitive that couldn't be taught. He'd put on the headset and close his eyes and he could read the floor of the ocean by sound alone, calling out depths and formations the way you'd read a menu. He kept 3 photographs in his bunk: his mother, his sister Bridget, a border collie named Pip. He whistled constantly without seeming to realize he was doing it, half-remembered fragments of songs, broken melodies that never went anywhere. He used to break off mid-whistle and go quiet, and then start a completely different fragment 5 minutes later. I miss him. I've missed him since February 1944, and I'll miss him until I stop. Corporal Terry Webb, Royal Marines, Bristol. Solid, dark, quiet. 26. He had a dry humor that took time to adjust to, and once you adjusted, was the funniest thing you'd ever heard. He had a girl back home named Elsie, and he talked about her the way some men talk about food when they're hungry. Not constantly, but with a deep private need that was obvious to everyone. Able Seaman Hugh Fenwick, radio operator, Welsh from Swansea, 20 years old, the youngest of us. He had the kind of face that didn't quite look finished, like the features were still settling. Good at his work, nervous in a way he tried to hide and couldn't. Able Seaman Malcolm Barlow, our medic, our cook, our general fixer. 41. From Kidderminster, the oldest among the enlisted men and the one we all treated as a kind of unofficial anchor point. Someone you measured your own steadiness against. He'd been in the Navy since before the war, and he'd been everywhere. And the particular quality of a man who has been everywhere and come back is a kind of calm that doesn't perform itself. Barlow's calm was just there. It was load-bearing. He sang while he worked. Not well, but reliably, an endless repertoire of music hall songs in a key that was purely his own. Sub-Lieutenant Peter Crane, 25, second in command to Marsh. Cambridge accent, perpetually damp from the moment we entered southern latitudes. He had intellectual courage, the kind that believes thinking hard enough about a problem solves it, which is adequate in peacetime and perfectly useless at the bottom of the world. There were 8 others. I won't name them here. Some survived, some didn't. What happened to them is not mine to describe in full. The first weeks were routine. We established base camp on the northern shore of the caldera, a prefabricated hut, stores, radio equipment. The ships anchored in the harbor. We set up weather instruments. Kemp collected rock samples from the caldera walls with what I can only describe as barely contained joy. I ran the signal station, 2-hour watches, monitoring frequencies, logging data, maintaining comms with Stanley. Cold work, desk work, the kind that can make your hands go numb if you stop paying attention. The jaw thing started on the 3rd day. I thought it was a filling. I'd had dental work done in Portsmouth before we shipped out, and I assumed something had shifted. I mentioned it to Barlow, who had the face of a man who had heard every complaint twice and believed none of them. He looked in my mouth with a torch and found nothing wrong. 2 aspirin and a shrug. But it wasn't just me. By the end of the first week, 4 of us had mentioned it to each other, separately. This low vibration in the jaw, in the back teeth specifically. Not pain. Presence. A resonance you felt in the bone rather than heard with the ears. Like the island was producing a note and you were tuned to it. Kemp said it was geothermal. The volcanic activity beneath Deception Island produced infrasound, low-frequency vibration below the threshold of normal hearing, but within the range of bone conduction, perfectly normal for a caldera environment. Nothing to worry about. He said that in the first week. By the 3rd week, he'd stopped saying it. The 6th of December. Past midnight, my watch. The caldera was still outside, the endless pale gray of the Antarctic summer night. Everything flat and quiet, and steaming faintly from the thermal vents. Doyle put his head through the partition hatch from the adjacent hut. He had an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Not frightened, more like puzzled. The look of someone given an answer that doesn't fit the question. "Holt," he said. "Come have a look at this." I left Fenwick on the radio and went next door. "Come have a look at this." I left Fenwick on the radio and went next door. The sonar equipment, standard RN issue, a transducer lowered through a hole we'd cut in the ice at the water's edge, connected to a strip chart recorder running paper tape, was marking depth traces in purple ink. The caldera floor was supposed to sit between 60 and 200 fathoms, depending on position. We'd confirmed it against Kemp's charts in the first 3 days. "Watch the depth trace," Doyle said. The recorder printed its line. 60 fathoms. 60, 62, then 50, 48, 44. "It's rising," I said. "Has been since 2100. 4 hours. 4 fathoms, Holt. In 4 hours. Volcanic uplife at. Volcanic uplift is weeks. Months. This is..." He shook his head slowly. "This is nothing I know." I looked at the recorder. 41 fathoms? You've told Marsh. Wanted to check the equipment first. It's not the equipment. He said it the way you say something when you'd been hoping it was the equipment, and now you've run out of that hope. Marsh heard the report at 0600. He stood with his arms behind his back while Doyle walked him through the numbers. Kemp was there too, pulled from his bunk, squinting at the chart tape through his loupe. Kemp was there too, pulled from his bunk, squinting at the chart tape through his loupe. When Doyle finished, Marsh said, "Volcanic uplife." Kemp shook his head. At this rate, a volcanic uplift event of this magnitude would be felt. The ground would shake. The thermal vents would... "Dr. Kemp, you told us the geothermal activity under this island is significant. An unusual thermal event, Commander." Kemp's voice was still measured, but something had sharpened in it. "I need to pull a sediment core from the caldera floor. A physical sample. I need to actually examine what is down there." "The floor is 60 fathoms down," Crane offered. 40, Doyle said quietly, as of 0515. The room went quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Marsh looked at the chart tape. Something moved behind his eyes. A calculation of some kind. A brief and private reckoning. Then it closed. "We continue monitoring." "Doyle, readings every 30 minutes. Kemp, draw whatever equipment you need for your samples. If the situation changes materially, you will inform me." He picked up his cap. "We continue monitoring." He left. Kemp watched the door for a moment after it shut. "Continue monitoring," he said to no one in particular. "Continue monitoring," he said to no one in particular. Right. By the 9th of December, the caldera floor had risen to 52 fathoms and the temperature anomaly had started. Fenwick found it first. He came off his morning radio watch and fetched me to look at the antenna mast. Standard shortwave array, steel housing, mounted on the north beach. The housing was warm, not from sun. There was no sun. Warm the way metal is warm when it has been sitting in a heated room. I put my hand on it and took it back. Not burned. Just wrong. Warm in the specific way that says something nearby is generating heat. Ambient air. -7. I spent an hour on the North Beach with the contact thermometer. The volcanic sand read 11 degrees in some patches, and -8 3 feet away. Not uniform. Patchy. As if something below the surface was radiating inconsistently through multiple small points rather than a single source. I reported it to Marsh. He listened. He said, "Geothermal activity under this island is well documented. Continue monitoring." I went out that night, late, after my watch, and sat on the North Beach and pressed my palm flat against the volcanic ash. I could feel a slow pulse through my hand. Once every 4 or 5 seconds. Steady, like something below me was breathing. The jaw vibration was the worst it had been. A deep, slow note felt in the skull more than the teeth. I didn't connect those two things yet. I didn't connect them until Kemp showed me the microscope slide a week later. And by then, it seemed almost obvious. Kemp built his coring device over 3 days. A weighted steel tube, 50 meters of cable, a winch bolted to a wooden platform. He and Doyle lowered it through the water from the small wooden tender on the 12th of December, above what was then 31 fathoms of caldera floor still rising. I was in the signals hut when Kemp came back. He didn't come back the way he normally came back from field work, taking his boots off in the doorway, settling at his table, making tea before he did anything else. He came through the door at something close to a run and went directly to the microscope in the back corner, the fold-out table under the kerosene lamp. He had a core sample in a metal cylinder, and he slid a glass slide together with a surgical precision that made clear he'd been thinking about nothing else the entire way back from the tender. He had a core sample in a metal cylinder, and he slid a glass slide together with a surgical precision that made clear he'd been thinking about nothing else the entire way back from the tender. He spent 2 minutes adjusting focus. Then he sat back. "Holt," he said. "Come here." I looked through the eyepiece. The core material was gray-black volcanic silt, but running through it, threaded through it, were filaments. Pale gold, branching from central nodes in patterns that looked like something I'd seen before but couldn't place. Some network structure, something organic. "What is that?" Kemp had his notebook open. "The nearest description I have is fungal mycelium. But it's not fungal. It's not botanical. The cell structure," he pointed. "Each filament has a defined flexible membrane. It's cellular, it's biological, it's alive." I looked up, in the volcanic sediment, at 30 fathoms, in the bottom of a geothermal caldera. He closed his notebook, opened it. "The heat from the vents has sustained it. Whatever this is, it has been sustained by the geothermal activity down here for, I don't have a figure, a very long time." "How large?" "The core sample is representative of the whole floor. If this network is consistent across the caldera," he stopped. "Across the caldera floor, this would be very large. Across the caldera floor, this would be very large. A single connected organism across the entire width of the caldera." I went and stood outside in the cold for several minutes. The jaw vibration was like a church bell, one of the big ones, rung an hour ago, still felt in the sternum. When I came back in, Kemp was still at the microscope. I asked what it meant. He looked up at me, and then he said, very quietly, without looking away, "Deception Island isn't a crater." "What?" "It's a mouth. He went to Marsh the next morning. I went with him. I thought having me there would matter." It didn't. Kemp laid out his evidence on Marsh's desk. The sediment data, the microscope photographs he developed in the darkroom corner. Small, blurry, but the filament structures visible. The temperature anomalies. The caldera floor now at 28 fathoms, and still climbing. Marsh examined the materials. He was quiet for a long while. Your conclusion, Dr. Kemp. I think the organism, whatever is in the sediment, is networked. Connected across the full width of the caldera floor. I think the rising of the floor isn't volcanic uplife. I think it's deliberate. I think it is aware of its environment. I think the rising of the floor isn't volcanic uplife. I think it's deliberate movement. Deliberate. I think it is aware of its environment, responding to stimuli. Possibly, he paused. Possibly aware of us. Marsh was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a decision already made. We are here to establish a weather station and gather survey data. We are not equipped to investigate biological anomalies. Commander, this isn't a biological anomaly. It's a biological. We are not equipped, Dr. Kemp. The flat voice. The planed board absolute. You have found a thermophilic organism in volcanic sediment. That is interesting. It may be scientifically significant. What it is not is a threat to this operation, or a reason to deviate from our orders. Something is rising. Something alive. The caldera floor is volcanic. Any movement is consistent. Kemp's voice went sharp for the first and only time I ever heard it. Commander, with respect, nothing about any of this is consistent with anything I have ever. That will be all, Dr. Kemp. Kemp stood there with his hands at his sides. Then he picked up his photographs from the desk. Marsh had not touched them, had not looked at them since the initial glance. Right, Kemp said. Right, Kemp said. Right then. Outside, he stood on the black beach and stared at the cold air water. Steam rising from the thermal patches in the cold air. He didn't look at the photographs, Kemp said. I had nothing useful to say to that. Nothing that would have helped. The hijacking started on the 15th of December. Fenwick found me at 3 in the morning, the not yet finished face, carrying something new underneath the usual nervousness. He'd been on night watch monitoring the standard military frequencies. I'm picking up transmissions, he said. That's your job, Fenwick. Not traffic. Not scheduled traffic. On the lower bands. Holt, it's voices. In the radio room, he tuned to the frequency he'd logged. Static. Low hiss. And then, underneath it, my own voice, coming out of the receiver. Reading coordinates, 39 south, 14 west. My voice, my intonation, my particular northern vowels, reading a position that corresponded, I checked later, to a point in the South Atlantic, with nothing anywhere near it. I pulled the headset off. When did this start? 20 minutes ago. It cycles. It cycles. Goes quiet, comes back. I haven't been broadcasting. I know. I had not been near the radio that night. I had been in my bunk. I said, log it. Don't tell the others yet. And then, because I needed to say it out loud to someone, something is listening to us. Fenwick said nothing. He had the look of someone who had already arrived at that conclusion and was not finding it useful. I reported it to Marsh at 0600. He said it was signal reflection. Atmospheric conditions at high southern latitudes produced unusual propagation effects. He said to log it and continue monitoring. I went outside and sat on the warm beach, and the jaw vibration was the loudest it had been in 2 weeks, and I thought about the fact that whatever was below me had been recording my voice for 15 days, and I thought about what it might be doing with the recording. Then on the 3rd of January it told me, my morning watch, the receiver running, my voice coming through on the lower band, but this time assembled. Not a replay of a single conversation. Fragments from different exchanges, different days, different contexts, joined into a new sentence. Fragments from different exchanges, different days, different contexts, joined into a new sentence. My voice saying, the floor is not. volcanic. The organism is. A pause. Is the island. My voice sang Kemp's conclusion, in a sentence I had never spoken. Fenwick, beside me, put his hand on the recorder to capture it, and his face was the color of old paper. Holt, he said. Holt, it took your words apart. It rebuilt them. I know. How does it? I don't know. I went to Marsh again. I played him the recording. He listened to the whole thing, my voice saying, "The organism is the island," in a sentence constructed from pieces of 30 different conversations. He turned the recorder off. Atmospheric interference. Signal distortion can produce apparent. Sir, I kept my voice level. I had practiced keeping my voice level. That is my voice. Those are words I have spoken on this island. They have been assembled into a new sentence. Something is using our transmissions to leading Seaman Holt. The flat voice. The absolute. I understand that conditions here are producing unusual phenomena. I understand that some of our readings are outside normal parameters. But I will not permit this operation to be derailed by phenomena that have not been adequately explained through conventional analysis. Is that clear, sir? Is that clear? Yes, sir. I walked out. The jaw was a held note in my skull, something between a tone and a pressure. Kemp was coming up from the tender with more water samples. He had the controlled alarm expression I'd learned to read in him over the past month. Holt, he said. The water temperature, 3 degrees. 2 days ago, 4.5 this morning. Something is heating it. If the organism is metabolizing at sufficient scale, generating heat as a byproduct of growth, then the heat output implies a mass that is. He stopped. Very large. Very, very large. Holt, I think the island itself, the volcanic rock, the caldera walls, I think it has been incorporating the geological material, not living alongside it. Incorporating it. The rock is part of it now. The basalt is. He searched for the word. It's like a skeleton. The geothermal water is like blood. The caldera is. Its stomach. I said. He looked at me. Yes, he said. Exactly that. Christmas. We kept watching. We kept watching. The caldera floor. 17 fathoms on Christmas Eve. 14 on Boxing Day. The watercolor had shifted not dramatically, but there. A faint amber tinge. Gold pale. Visible in the surface light. Kemp brought me new slides each day, and the filament network was denser with each sample. The membranes around each filament thicker, more defined. On the 3rd of January, he came to me with a sample he'd pulled from the caldera water itself. Not sediment. Open water. Surface layer. He put it under the microscope, and in the eyepiece I could see the filaments drifting. Passive. Suspended. They're everywhere now, he said. Not just the floor. The water column. And? He adjusted focus. Watch the membrane. I watched. The filament's outer membrane was contracting. Slowly. Regularly. Once every 5 seconds. The same interval as the pulse I'd felt in the beach sand 3 weeks earlier. The same interval. The caldera was breathing. One vast organism, breathing once every 5 seconds. And I'd been feeling it in my jaw for a month. On the 8th of January, Doyle called me to the sonar room on the field telephone. On the 8th of January, Doyle called me to the sonar room on the field telephone. His voice was flat in a particular way that said the instrument readings had done something that his voice could not. I put on the headset, heard the ping of the sonar returning from the caldera floor, now 10 fathoms. And underneath the acoustic data, underneath the technical signal, breathing. Not the metaphor, not a poetic comparison. Actual respiration rhythm. A long, slow inhalation over 3 seconds. A hold, an exhalation. It's the same frequency as the jaw thing, I said. Doyle looked at me. What? The vibration in my jaw? In all our jaws, it's the same frequency as the acoustic return from the caldera floor. Doyle put his hand against his own jaw, pressed. Then he said quietly, "It's been reaching us this whole time. Through the rock. Through the sand. It's been." He stopped. "It knows we're here. It's known since we arrived." I said, "I'm taking this to Marsh. I took it to Marsh at 1300. Doyle said. "He told me to recalibrate the equipment and continue monitoring." Doyle was 23 years old. He had a border collie named Pip and a half-remembered song always somewhere in his throat. And he looked, just then, about 14. He had a border collie named Pip and a half-remembered song always somewhere in his throat. And he looked, just then, about 14. His hand went to his breast pocket, where the photographs were, checking they were there. A private gesture, small and unconscious. I noticed it. I won't forget it. The 10th of January. All hands meeting in the main hut. 14 men plus Kemp jammed into a space built for 8. Marsh at the front, Crane behind him. "Gentlemen, our orders are to maintain occupation of Deception Island through the winter. Those orders stand. We have observed a number of unusual phenomena that will be logged and reported to Naval Intelligence upon our return. Dr. Kemp has identified an unusual biological formation in the caldera sediment. Sir." Kemp. From the back, his notebook open, his voice like a man who has run out of ways to say the same thing politely. "The floor of this caldera is now at 8 fathoms. When we arrived, it was 60. The rate of rise has been consistent. The organism I've identified in the sediment constitutes a single networked entity spanning the full width of the caldera. The water temperature is 9 degrees, up from 2.5 when we arrived. The acoustic signature from the floor shows respiratory activity. The acoustic signature from the floor shows respiratory activity. The radio anomalies demonstrate that whatever is below us has been recording our communications and using our own voices to Dr. Kemp, Commander. I estimate the caldera floor will reach the surface within 72 to 96 hours at current rate. When it does, the organism will surface. I do not know what happens then. What I do know is that we cannot stop it with what we have, and we should be in open water before it happens." Silence. Marsh said, "You are requesting we abandon the operation. I'm requesting we relocate to safe water, while we..." The answer is no. Kemp stood there, 14 men in a hut that smelled of kerosene and wet wool, and the faint amber tinge of the caldera water that was, even now, somehow coming through the ventilation gaps in the wall. "We maintain our position," Marsh said. "We continue our work. We document what we observe. That is all." Kemp came to me that night with new slides. He'd pulled a sand sample from the North Beach that afternoon, near the antenna mast, and the filament network was in the beach sand. Not just in the water, not just in the caldera sediment at the bottom. In the ground we were standing on. In the ground we were standing on. "It's been here the whole time," I said. "We walked into its mouth and set up camp," he said. I looked at the slide for a long time. The filaments were denser than anything I'd seen from the water samples. Not passive now. Not drifting. Directional. Oriented. Oriented, as near as I could tell. Upward. "What happens when it surfaces?" I said. Kemp was quiet for a moment. "In biology, when an organism extends its surface interface into a new medium," he stopped. Started again. "When a living thing reaches into a new space, it explores what it finds there. It samples, it learns, and then it does what organisms do," he said. January 12th, 4 fathoms. The caldera water had gone amber, not the faint tinge I'd noticed 2 weeks ago. Amber. The color of strong tea lit from below, the filaments visible to the naked eye as gold threads drifting in currents that weren't quite currents. January 13th, Doyle's field telephone call at 0700. Holt. The readings. Come now. He had the strip chart running at its fastest setting, paper accumulating on the floor. He'd switched to a shorter range setting on the sonar to get better resolution on the floor detail. The depth trace was... There was no steady line anymore. The floor was irregular. Changing the acoustic return was showing structures, sharp, vertical peaks. 2 fathoms, he said. 12 feet, below the hull depth of Scoresby. I put on the headset. The breathing was loud now, not the subtle subtext I'd heard in December, buried underneath the technical signal. The breathing was the signal. The floor of the caldera was an organism 12 feet below the surface of the water, and I could hear it inhale. I could count the seconds between inhale and exhale. I could feel it in my jaw, the vibration matching the acoustic rhythm so exactly, so completely, that I couldn't separate the two. Couldn't tell if what I was hearing was in the headset or in my skull. And then the surface of the caldera changed. It started in the center. A slow lifting, a heave, like something large taking a breath beneath stretched skin. The amber water rose in a dome. 6 feet, 10, 15, and then broke, not the way water breaks, the way skin breaks. It tore open, and what came through was not water. I'll tell you what I saw, and you'll do with it what you can. I'll tell you what I saw, and you'll do with it what you can. The material that emerged was pale gold, wet, the color of old bone, the color of the membrane walls in Kemp's microscope slides, but at a scale that, you know what a whale is. You know how large a whale is, how it fills your sense of proportion when you see one up close. Multiply that until the whale becomes the ocean around it. Multiply it until the thing rising from the center of the caldera fills your field of vision from cliff to cliff, until you are not looking at a creature, but at a continent deciding to stand up. A central structure, branching from it, extensions as thick as the Scoresby herself, reaching the caldera walls on both sides, rooting into the volcanic rock. The surface had a texture, I am going to say it, that looked like folded tissue, like the inside of something's mouth. And it breathed. You could see it breathe, the whole mass expanding slowly on the inhale, the branches pulling taut, the surface rippling, then settling on the exhale. It was warm. From 40 meters away, I could feel it, a heat like a furnace door left open a crack, radiating across the caldera water. From 40 meters away, I could feel it, a heat like a furnace door left open a crack, radiating across the caldera water. I want to tell you, and I need you to understand this matters, that I'm not saying it lightly. It was beautiful, in the worst possible way, in a way that had nothing to do with beauty being a good thing. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. The gold color in the pale Antarctic light, the scale of it, the slow rhythm of respiration, the sense of something vast completing something it had been working toward for a very long time. I stood on the beach, and I could not move. Not from fear, from something older than fear, from awe. Then the shooting started. Webb had his Leonfield out. I heard the shots before I processed what I was seeing, the crack of the rifle echoing off the caldera walls. Webb at the waterline, proper military posture, controlled breathing between shots, rounds going into the central mass, punching through the outer membrane, disappearing. Nothing happened. "Webb," I said. "Webb, stop. What else do you suggest, Holt?" He fired again. The round went in, the membrane sealed behind it like pressing a finger into bread dough. Marsh was on the shore with his sidearm drawn and the field telephone at his ear. All hands. All hands. All hands. Service weapons and flares to the shore. Crane, engines on both ships. Crane, do you read? The temperature dropped. Not the way temperature drops. Not degrees over time. Between one breath and the next, the gap between inhale and exhale, the air changed. The moisture left it instantly. I felt my nasal passages go dry on the next inhale. The ambient temperature was -12. In 30 seconds, it was past -30, past -40. The cold that comes from inside things rather than outside them. The rock on the caldera walls cracked. I watched it happen, the thermal shock shattering slabs of basalt, sections the size of lorries calving off and crashing to the black shore. Where the gold filament network covered the cliff face, the rock cracked and fell, and the filaments held, contracting, pulling the remaining material toward themselves. Ice formed on the caldera surface, crackling out from the shore in sheets, moving fast, a white expansion across the amber water, everywhere except around the central structure, where the heat from the organism held the water open in a circle of bare amber. Then Barlow was running. Crane had the emergency medical stores from the main hut, and Barlow was behind him with the medical kit. Because Barlow always brought the medical kit, it was who Barlow was. And he was running across the north beach toward where I was standing with Webb, and his right foot went into the volcanic sand, not stuck, through it, boot and ankle disappearing into solid sand the way you'd push your hand into fog. He looked down. His expression was not panic. It was the expression of a man who has encountered an engineering problem he hasn't seen before. He reached down and his hand went through the sand surface, then his arm to the elbow. Webb was there before I was, dropping the rifle, grabbing Barlow's other arm, pulling. I grabbed the same arm. We pulled together. The sand had no texture around Barlow's disappearing limbs. No suction, no resistance. The sand simply was. And Barlow simply was not. And the line between those states moved up his body in smooth increments. Barlow looked at Webb. His face had moved from puzzlement to something I don't have a word for. Something between wonder and acceptance. "It's warm," he said. The sand took him to the chest. The sand took him to the chest. We kept pulling. There was nothing to pull. No boundary between him and the ground. Then, there was just the ground. Webb let go. I let go. We stood there above the smooth, unbroken volcanic sand. The jaw vibration was loud enough to feel in my back teeth, my cheekbones, the back of my skull. I stood there for a moment that was either 10 seconds or 10 minutes, and I cannot tell you which. Then Fenwick's voice came through the field telephone. Fenwick, who I'd left in the signals hut. Holt. I've got something on the lower band." A pause. Then his voice. Still Fenwick's voice, technically. The Welsh vowels, the same vocal register, but wrong in rhythm, wrong in cadence. The words arriving at the wrong intervals. We should come. A pause. The warmth here it is without. Another pause, longer. You have been feeling it in your jaw. All of you. Since December. It has been reaching through the rock for you since. A breath. A long, slow breath. The same 3-second inhale I've been hearing in the sonar headset all week. Since you arrived. It has learned everything you are. The frequencies you carry. Holt. Barlow is not gone. Barlow is a pause. Barlow is a pause. Complete. Holt. There is room. Fenwick. I said into the handset. Fenwick, where are you? What is your position? Inside the frequency now. Inside the... His voice, his actual voice surfacing briefly through the wrong rhythm. Holt, it's warm I can. And then back to the hollow cadence. Come back through the bellows. Come back through. It asks you to come. Static. The first LCVP was already in the water. 6 men, making for the gap between the central structure and the caldera wall. They had 40 meters of open water before the filaments in the surface thickened the water to something the propeller couldn't catch. Viscous, amber, resistant the way syrup resists a spoon. The engine ran. The boat didn't move. They were 40 meters from shore and fixed. The temperature kept dropping. Ice formed. The caldera surface seized in expanding white sheets. I watched. From the shore, the ice around the LCVP formed fast, faster than I'd ever seen ice form even in the Antarctic. And when it reached the hull of the landing craft, it didn't stop at the hull. The material property had changed. The ice went through the hull the way the sand had gone through Barlow. The ice went through the hull the way the sand had gone through Barlow. One of the men reached up, hand above the ice surface, reaching toward the sky. Then the hand was below the surface. The ice was smooth and unbroken, and there were 5 men, and then 4, and then 3. I looked away. I won't apologize for that. Then, something made me look back at the caldera water. Something at the edge of the amber circle around the central structure. Something I was seeing with the part of the brain that isn't connected to language, that just says, that shape, that face. Doyle, his face visible through the amber surface of the caldera water. Not deep, right at the surface just below it, the way a face is visible through a porthole. Recognizable. Frank Doyle, his freckles, his jaw, his closed eyes. But the color of him was gold pale, the same as the filaments, the same as the whole organism. And his face was not distressed. His face was what I can only call peaceful. His mouth was moving, no sound I could hear from the shore, but moving, saying something, words I couldn't read. Then the ice formed over the amber water and his face was gone. I stood there. The jaw vibration was louder than it had ever been. Louder than anything. Louder than anything. It was in my teeth, and my skull, and my chest, and my hands. Doyle was 23 years old. He had 3 photographs in his breast pocket. He had a border collie named Pip. He had a half-finished melody that lived in the back of his throat and came out whenever he wasn't paying attention. He was 23 years old and his face was peaceful under the water, and I couldn't do anything. And I didn't. Webb found me. He grabbed my arm and pulled, and we ran for the Scoresby. Crane had the engines running. The second LCVP was still mobile. Barely. Grinding through the forming ice surface. And Webb got 4 men into it and himself, and we made it to the ship's side. Up the ladder. 30 seconds. I went to the bridge. Marsh was there, standing at the port window, looking at the caldera, his sidearm in his right hand. He'd been trying to call Crane on the bridge telephone with his left, and the receiver was still pressed to his ear. "Commander," I said, "the Bellows. We need the anchor up and we need to go through the Bellows now." He was looking at the caldera, at the structure, at the gold pale mass of it breathing in the middle of the enclosed water, filling the harbor from cliff face to cliff face. He said quietly, "The other men." He looked at me then, and I watched it happen to him. Some reorganization behind the eyes, some assessment completing and returning a result he didn't have a protocol for. He took 1 step toward the bridge radio console. 1 step, hand reaching out, and his fingers touched the top of the radio housing, the steel casing, warm in that wrong way, warm in the way the antenna mast on the North Beach had been warm on the 9th of December, warm in the way the beach sand was warm when I'd pressed my palm to it 5 weeks ago. His hand rested on the radio housing. The gun fell. It hit the deck and his hand was still on the radio, and his eyes were still open and tracking. But whatever had been behind them was gone. Reginald Marsh, Lieutenant Commander, RN. Convoy Escort, North Atlantic, the flat voice, the absolute authority. The planeboard certainty. His face showed nothing. Not horror. Not peace. Nothing. Empty. Not unconscious. His eyes moved. He breathed. He tracked movement. But he wasn't there. Whatever the frequency in that radio housing had reached into him and taken, he wasn't there anymore. I don't know what he heard in those 2 seconds. I never will. "Crane," I said, very steadily, "pull the anchor, full ahead. We go through the Bellows." Crane was already at the wheel. He'd seen it too. We went through Neptune's Bellows at 1847 hours, the 13th of January 1944. The cliffs on either side close enough to see the individual rock formations. The tide pushing against us. Crane held the line. The Fitzroy was already in open water, anchored, waiting. We cleared the Bellows, and I need you to stay with me here, because this matters. The jaw vibration stopped. Not gradually. Not the way pain subsides after medication. Like cutting a wire. One instant, the bone hum was in my teeth and my skull and my sternum. The frequency I had been carrying for 6 weeks, that had been growing towards something for 6 weeks. And then we crossed the line of Neptune's Bellows into open salt water. And it cut off. Clean. Absolute. The temperature rose. Not dramatically. We were in the Southern Ocean in January. It was still -15. Not dramatically. We were in the Southern Ocean in January. It was still -15. But the cold was the right cold. The correct cold. Not the impossible falling cold of the caldera. Not the cold that came from inside things. Real cold. Antarctic cold. I stood on the deck and breathed real cold air, and the complete absence of the vibration was so total, so physical, that it was like stepping out of a building into open air, and only then realizing how much pressure you'd been under inside. Like standing next to something running at high frequency for hours, and then, when it stops, realizing your whole body had been resonating with it. I cried. I couldn't stop. I didn't know why, exactly. Didn't examine it. Just stood on the deck of the Scoresby in the Southern Ocean with the tears freezing on my face. And couldn't stop. Kemp came and stood beside me. He had his specimen jars in his pockets, his notebook under his arm, everything he'd managed to carry out of that hut. And he stood there with me, and neither of us spoke. The boundary, he said finally. Neptune's Bellows. That's its range limit. The territorial edge. He looked back at the dark shape of Deception Island, still visible astern, the horseshoe of black rock. The narrow gap, a mouth with a door in it, the cold, the current, the salinity of the open ocean. It can't extend beyond that. He said it like a man who is glad about something and is also not sure how long he will be glad about it. We ran north. Both ships. Best speed. The Drake Passage doing what the Drake Passage does. 40-foot swells. The ship corkscrewing. Everyone below decks sick or close to it. But it wasn't clean. The first night north of the Shetlands, the duty watch reported a shape off the port quarter. Long. Low. Gold pale in the searchlight beam when they brought it to bear. 300 meters off. Matching our speed exactly. Keeping station. Not closing. Not dropping back. Keeping pace. It was there for 4 hours. Then it wasn't. The Fitzroy reported the same thing. Her port quarter, different shape. Same description. The two shapes never crossed behind us. They held their separate distances. The second night, Barlow's voice came through on the lower radio band. His voice, unmistakably, the particular Kidderminster vowels, the music hall melody he'd been singing the morning of the 13th. Full and warm and clear in the static. Full and warm and clear in the static. Not distorted the way Fenwick's had been distorted. Just Barlow, singing, as if he were still in the galley making breakfast. I pulled the headset off. I didn't put it back on until we were north of the Falklands. The shapes in the water followed us for 2 nights, and then were gone. I've had a long time to think about what that meant. Whether they were pursuing us, whether they were escorting us, whether there's a difference. I think it let us go. I think it made a choice. We were in open salt water past the territorial boundary, and it could have pushed further. I don't know what the costs would have been for it, pushing into water that cold and saline. But I think it could have pushed further and didn't. I think it watched us leave and decided that was enough. I think about that sometimes. Why enough? What enough means to something that has been waiting at the bottom of a volcanic caldera since before anything on this planet had a brain. Maybe it got what it came for. Marsh was kept in his cabin. He ate when someone put food in front of him. He slept. He tracked movement with his eyes. He didn't speak and didn't respond to his name or his rank. He didn't speak and didn't respond to his name or his rank. His right hand, the one that had rested on the radio housing, had a faint amber stain on the fingers that was gone by the time we reached Montevideo. In Montevideo, we were met by men in gray suits. The man who debriefed me didn't introduce himself. He had a folder and a form and a face like a photograph of a face. Not a face. He sat across a table in a windowless room in a building I was never told the address of, and he told me what had happened. The caldera at Deception Island had experienced an unusual volcanic event, thermal uplift followed by rapid temperature inversion, consistent with volcanic degassing. The organisms detected in the sediment samples were thermophilic archaea, extremophile bacteria. Scientifically interesting. Perfectly harmless, well documented in comparable environments. The acoustic anomalies were natural resonance effects produced by the caldera geometry. The radio interference was ionospheric disturbance, not uncommon at high southern latitudes. The men who had been lost had drowned in the thermal event. Their bodies had not been recovered. Lieutenant Commander Marsh had suffered a psychological breakdown consistent with extreme command stress in an isolated environment. He told me all of this without reading from the folder, without hesitating, without looking away, in the voice of a man who had constructed this explanation so many times it had become its own kind of truth. He slid a form across the table. I signed it. I was 22 years old. I was very tired. I wanted to go home to Salford and see something green, and know that the things below my feet were normal. The man across the table had eyes that explained, without a single word of threat, what would happen if I didn't sign. I signed it. I went home. I'm not proud of it, but I'd do it again, in that room. At 22, the shame of it has had 40 years to find its proper size. And it has. And it's mine. Medical discharge. Spring 1944. The jaw pain was documented. A dental condition of unknown origin, likely stress-related. They gave me a pension and a handshake and a list of things I was not to discuss, which was everything. For a while I thought that was the right answer. Just nothing. Keep your head down and be glad you made it back. Keep your head down and be glad you made it back. Then the years went by and I started counting up who hadn't. Doyle, 23. Cork, the sonar equipment he was gifted with, the photographs in his breast pocket, the whistled fragments. He went back to his instruments when the caldera surface broke and I didn't see what happened. He wasn't on the Scoresby when we cleared the Bellows. The photograph of his sister Bridget was on his bunk when we cleared out his effects in Montevideo. I kept it. I still have it. Barlow. Gone into the North Beach at 16, 12 hours on the 13th of January. Gone with wonder on his face. I don't know what happens to people who go into something like that. I hope the warmth was what he said it was. Fenwick. Recovered from the signal's hut intact. Physically. But whatever had happened to him in those 20 minutes alone in that hut with the radio, whatever the signal had done to him in there, or whatever he'd done to himself trying to respond to it, he wasn't intact in other ways. Naval Psychiatric Facility in Portsmouth. 2 years. Released 1946. Moved back to his parents in Swansea. Never worked again. Never married. His mother wrote to me in 1981 to say he'd died. She said he'd been quiet at the end. I didn't write back, which I regret. Marsh. Hospital care from 1944 until sometime in the 1950s from what I can piece together. Not considered recoverable. His service record, when a contact in Naval Records ran it for me in 1963, had been, his word was sanitized, which is different from redacted. Redacted means parts are missing. Sanitized means the record has been made to say something other than what happened. Webb. He got himself and 4 other men onto that Scoresby and he made it home. And he's in Somerset, with a wife and grandchildren, and he has asked me, specifically, not to say more than that. So I won't. The last time I saw him, 1987, we drank tea in his kitchen and didn't talk about it at all, and it was the most comfortable I'd been in 20 years. Kemp. In 1951, he published a paper on thermophilic organisms in Antarctic geothermal environments. No mention of Deception Island. No mention of anything we found. A perfectly conventional piece of geology. He never mentioned it publicly again. I went to see him in 1968. He was in a care home in Surrey. Early dementia, they told me. Early dementia, they told me. When I walked in, he was sitting by the window looking at the garden, and I said his name, and he turned. Recognition crossed his face. Not of me exactly, of something I represented, something I reminded him of. He said, "The floor is still rising." Then he turned back to the window. I sat with him for an hour. He didn't speak again. He died in 1972, and whatever notes he kept, whatever record he maintained of what he found in the caldera sediment at Deception Island, is either in a box in some ministry archive, or it is gone. I believe it is gone. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington in December 1959. 12 nations, the Americans, the Soviets, the British, the Argentinians, the Australians, the Norwegians, nations in the middle of the Cold War, nations in active territorial dispute over Antarctic claims, nations that in every other context were adversaries. They all signed. They agreed to ban military activity. They agreed to prohibit nuclear testing on the continent. They agreed to free exchange of scientific data. They agreed, and this is the specific part, that all territorial claims would be frozen, not resolved, not adjudicated, frozen indefinitely. Frozen indefinitely. You might think that's diplomacy, the enlightened international community setting aside its differences in the pursuit of science. I have a different theory. Operation Tabarin was 1943. The American Operation High Jump was 1946. 6,700 men, and 13 ships to do what they officially called a training exercise. In Antarctica, the Soviets sent their first Antarctic expedition in 1955. 5-6. Every major power within 10 years of the end of the war sent expeditions south, to the same continent, to the same remote, inhospitable place, with nothing of obvious strategic value. And then in 1959, those same powers, who agreed on nothing, who couldn't discuss what to have for breakfast without it becoming a geopolitical incident, sat down in Washington and signed a treaty that said, nobody drills here, nobody mines here, nobody builds military installations here. All territorial claims, including claims that nations had been asserting for decades and had every legal intention of pressing, are frozen. Indefinitely. I think they found their own versions of Deception Island. Different locations, different expressions of it, and I think they all understood, separately and then collectively, that they had found something none of them could manage, and none of them wanted to be the one to disturb. So they put a lid on it, dressed it up as science, signed it into law, put a treaty over it the same way you put a tarpaulin over a hole in a roof, not to fix the problem, but to keep the weather out, while you hope the problem doesn't get worse. Here is what I am watching get worse. Deception Island has erupted 3 times since we left it. 1967, 1970. The geologists attribute these to the caldera's volcanic activity. They are correct as far as that goes. What they don't explain is why the eruption pattern has no precedent in the island's documented history, or why the thermal activity in the caldera has been consistently elevated since the early 1960s, or why the number of active steam vents on the island's interior shore has more than doubled since the 1970s. The Antarctic ice is melting. You know this. Everyone knows this. The ice shelf is thinning. The meltwater is changing the salinity and temperature of the Southern Ocean. The meltwater is changing the salinity and temperature of the Southern Ocean. The thermal gradients that defined the boundary of the thing's territory in January 1944, the cold, the salinity, the particular properties of that water, are shifting. Year by year, the Southern Ocean is becoming warmer, less cold, less saline. Kemp said the boundary was the salinity and the temperature. He said the territorial limit of Neptune's Bellows was the cold and the open ocean. The ocean is getting warmer. The jaw thing has been changing. For 60 years it was steady, bad in cold weather, bearable in summer, always there but always the same. In the last 5 years, it has been getting louder. Not much. Not all at once. A slow increment, a gradual increase the way a radio signal gets stronger as you drive toward the transmitter. like something is getting closer to the surface, like the boundary isn't holding the way it held. The tobacco tin is on the mantelpiece. Inside it, Royal Navy Form S, 1043, Supply Manifest, HMS William Scoresby, November 1943. Inventory of oceanographic equipment, 12 entries, quantities and reference numbers, nothing unusual. And in the bottom right corner, pencil, a handwriting I have looked at for 80 years and would know anywhere. And in the bottom right corner, pencil, a handwriting I have looked at for 80 years and would know anywhere. 7 words. It knows what the island is. Frank Doyle wrote those words. Not the Doyle who went into the caldera water on the 14th of February 1944 at 10 fathoms. Not the Doyle whose face I saw under the amber surface of the caldera on the 13th of January, peaceful and pale and gold. His mouth moving in silence. Something that had Doyle's handwriting, whatever remained of Doyle's handwriting, wrote those words on a supply manifest that was officially filed and date stamped 6 days after he disappeared. 6 days after he was gone. That is my proof. That single page in a tobacco tin. That's all I have, and it's enough. Because I know what I know, and I know whose handwriting that is. And I know that hand was gone before that date stamp was applied. Whatever I saw under the water at Deception Island has been down there since before there was anything on this planet, with a brain or a word or a jaw to feel the frequency of it. It learned us in 6 weeks. It took our voices apart and rebuilt them into new sentences. It reached us through 60 feet of solid rock and volcanic sand and the walls of the hut we slept in. It let us go. I don't know why it let us go. I don't know why it let us go. I've thought about it for 80 years, and I don't have a better answer than I did in 1944. The ice is melting. The ocean is warming. The boundary at Neptune's Bellows, the cold and the salt that held it in, is shifting, degree by degree, year by year. And whatever was patient enough to wait at the bottom of a volcanic caldera since before there were humans to disturb it, is patient enough to wait a little longer. My jaw hurts. Right now, sitting here, telling you this, my jaw is humming like a held note, like a church bell rung an hour ago, like something very large and very far away breathing in and out in the dark. It knows what the island is. The question, the one I'm leaving with you because I don't have the answer and I'm running out of time to find it, is whether we've worked out yet what we are.